In 1993, a dedicated nurse, Carol Williams, vanished without a trace. How did this beloved, punctual woman, who never missed a shift, disappear in broad daylight? What happened on that fateful morning, and why did it take 25 years to uncover the truth? Carol Williams. She was the woman everyone counted on. A nurse who lived her life in perfect rhythm with the clock. She was the person who would always show up, always be there for her patients. She was a fixture, never late, always dependable. But one day, on October 15, 1993, Carol just vanished. And for the next 25 years, her disappearance would haunt everyone who knew her. Her colleagues, her friends, even the strangers in her neighborhood. They all had one question: where is Carol? In the days that followed, her disappearance sent shockwaves through her community. Her family and friends couldn't understand it. How could she, of all people, just disappear? Carol Williams was not the type of person to walk away. She had a routine, and she stuck to it with an almost unnatural precision. Her colleagues at Mount Sinai Hospital joked that she was more reliable than the subway schedule itself, arriving 15 minutes early every single day, always with her thermos of coffee, her worn leather purse slung across her shoulder. But this time, Carol didn't show up. The hospital, her colleagues, and her family, they all began to feel something wasn't right. What was the connection between Carol's disappearance and the next 25 years of unanswered questions? Why did it take so long to uncover the truth? What had been missed in the investigation? This was a mystery that no one could solve at the time. But 25 years later, the case would break wide open, and everything would change. This story would reveal much more than anyone ever expected. It would expose secrets hidden in plain sight, and uncover a predator that had been stalking Carol for months before she vanished. The truth would finally come to light, but only after decades of unanswered questions, and only after the most unexpected breakthroughs. Stay with me as we dive deeper into Carol Williams' story, a story that began as a missing person case and turned into a haunting investigation that took more than 2 decades to solve. And just as we think we have it all figured out, the truth begins to unravel in ways no one could have predicted. Before I begin, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. I'd love to know just how far this story is reaching. The morning of October 15th, 1993. Carol Williams, a woman who had never missed a shift in her entire career, was suddenly gone. And the city, in its usual rush, its noisy, bustling, unpredictable rhythm, just moved on. The disappearance of Carol Williams wasn't treated as an emergency at first. Detective Mike Sullivan, assigned to the case, approached it with what he believed was a typical protocol for missing persons. He filed it under routine disappearance, the kind that happens in big cities like New York all the time. People disappear for all sorts of reasons. People get lost, they leave voluntarily, or they have personal issues that cause them to vanish for a while. Mike Sullivan, a seasoned detective with years of experience in Queens, knew this. He was methodical. He didn't jump to conclusions. But even he couldn't ignore that something felt different about this case. Carol was not just anyone. She was a nurse who had earned the trust of her colleagues, a woman who had never once failed to show up for work. Carol had been a constant. Her disappearance didn't make sense. Her supervisor, Margaret Torres, had worked alongside Carol for years. They had been through double shifts, budget cuts, and the endless demands of the hospital together. She knew Carol's habits like she knew her own. So, when Margaret found Carol's empty locker in the cardiac unit at 7 a.m. that morning, it felt wrong. Margaret stood there staring at the locker, knowing that this was not like Carol. She called Carol's apartment. No answer. She called again. Still no answer. The third call went to the hospital's Human Resources Department, but they reassured her that unexcused absences happened, even to the most reliable employees. But Margaret knew better. She knew Carol Williams wasn't the type of person to just take off, especially without any warning. So Margaret kept calling, reaching out to anyone who might know where Carol was. By 10 a.m., the entire hospital staff was on edge. Something wasn't right. Carol's absence was starting to unravel the calm that had existed in the unit for so many years. At the same time, across town, Carol's roommate, Sarah Chen, was waking up to a nightmare. Sarah had shared an apartment with Carol for 2 years. They had a comfortable, predictable routine. They had become more than roommates. Sarah considered Carol a close friend. On that morning, though, something felt different to Sarah, too. When Carol didn't show up at 6 a.m., Sarah's heart sank. She knew the routine by heart. Carol would leave for work, the coffee mug would sit on the kitchen counter, and the apartment would fall silent until Sarah returned from her overnight shift. But this time, that silence felt heavier. Sarah's worry grew as the hours passed. The longer Carol stayed missing, the more the city seemed to swallow up any hope of finding her. Sarah made the call to the police at 10 a.m., her voice shaking. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. And the investigation began, with a methodical approach from Detective Mike Sullivan. Yet everything was so ordinary. There were no signs of forced entry into Carol's apartment. No broken windows. No signs of struggle. Just an empty room and a missing woman. The neighborhood was full of questions, but the answers were elusive. The investigation became a series of dead ends. Carol's bank accounts untouched. Her credit cards unused. Her apartment undisturbed, except for the growing pile of unopened mail. And still, there was no trace of Carol. The community of Queens, the hospital staff, and even Carol's family were all searching. Yet there was no sign. The city just moved forward as it always did. What happened to Carol? Where did she go? And why had this case, so simple yet so perplexing, been left to gather dust for 25 long years? What had been missed in those crucial first days? Something was wrong, but no one could see it yet. The truth, hiding just beneath the surface, would take years to surface. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank all of my amazing subscribers. Your support has been truly incredible, and it's because of you that we're able to keep these stories going and bring more light to cases that matter. Producing these videos takes time, research, and effort to ensure they're as accurate and impactful as possible. And if this story moved you, I need your support more than ever. If you're invested in this case and want to see more incredible cold cases that were finally solved, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps keep this community alive and thriving. Share this story with someone who believes in justice, someone who needs to hear this case. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be the first to know whenever I release new video. Let's get back into it, because the next part is going to leave you speechless. Carol Williams was not just another nurse. She was the kind of nurse who made people believe in humanity again. Her patients loved her. Her colleagues respected her. She had a way of making the toughest days seem a little easier, just by being herself. Punctual always. She arrived at Mount Sinai Hospital every morning exactly 15 minutes early. Always, without fail. It wasn't just a habit. It was part of who she was. Her colleagues joked that she was more reliable than the subway schedule itself. Always there, always ready, always steady. Carol didn't just show up to work. She showed up for people. For her patients. For the families who trusted her with their loved ones. And for the hospital staff, she was irreplaceable. She was the nurse who always knew which patient needed extra blankets, which one was scared of the needles, and which one would need a little extra time to adjust. Carol had a knack for reading people. Their fears, their pain, their needs. She didn't just do her job. She made it her mission to care for others with a compassion that shone through in everything she did. Her room at the hospital, the cardiac unit, was like her second home. Her colleagues in the unit knew her well. Margaret Torres, the charge nurse, had worked alongside her for years. Margaret trusted Carol more than she trusted her own schedule. When Carol didn't show up that morning, Margaret felt it in her gut. Margaret called Carol's apartment as soon as the shift started. Her voice was tight with worry, though she tried to hide it. No answer. She waited an hour. Tried again. Nothing. The unease began to settle in. Margaret tried to push the worry aside, thinking maybe Carol had just hit a bit of traffic. After all, New York City was unpredictable. Things happened. But this was Carol. Carol was never late. Carol always showed up. Carol never left anyone hanging. Then Sarah Chen, Carol's roommate, stepped in. Sarah had lived with Carol for the last 2 years, and they had developed an unspoken rhythm. Every morning, Carol would leave for work, and Sarah would return from her overnight shift. But this morning was different. By 7:30 a.m., Sarah had realized something was terribly wrong. She had expected Carol to be there, the apartment empty except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint smell of coffee lingering from the night before. But there was no Carol. Sarah's heart sank. Her first instinct was to pick up the phone, dialing Carol's number frantically. She called once, then twice, then a third time. And each time, the phone rang unanswered. By 10 a.m., Sarah couldn't wait any longer. She called the police. Her mind was racing, filled with fear and confusion. Carol had been more than just her roommate. She was her friend. Her sister in so many ways. This wasn't like Carol. The hospital, too, was feeling the weight of Carol's absence. Her colleagues had come to rely on her in ways they didn't even realize. She was always there, always dependable. But now there was an empty locker, a silent phone, a missed shift. Everyone felt it. The gap Carol left behind. Carol had been the glue in the hospital unit. She knew every procedure, every patient story, every detail that made the job seem human. The longer Carol stayed missing, the more the hospital's rhythm began to fall apart. Her disappearance wasn't just a shock for her colleagues. It was a shock for the entire community. Sarah continued to try and stay calm. But she couldn't. She knew Carol's routine too well to believe this was just a coincidence. She knew something was wrong. And as the hours ticked by, the phone calls went unanswered, the police report was filed, and the investigation began. The detective assigned to the case, Mike Sullivan, was methodical. He didn't rush to conclusions. He didn't jump to any drastic theories. He took a step back, took a deep breath, and assessed the situation like a puzzle waiting to be solved. He started by interviewing Sarah. Sarah's face was pale, her voice shaking as she described the morning Carol had left for work, just like every other morning. But this time, Sarah couldn't help but notice the absence, the eerie silence that now filled their apartment. Sarah's mind raced through the details. Her memory of the last moments she saw Carol. Carol had been getting ready as usual. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But now, all of it, the quiet steps, the morning routine, felt like pieces of a broken memory. The investigation continued. Detective Sullivan began to canvass Carol's route, talking to people who might have seen her on the way to the subway, anyone who might have known something. But just like the rest of the investigation, the answers were elusive. The Roosevelt Avenue subway station was packed with commuters that morning, just like any other. The busy sidewalks, the rushing crowds. No one had noticed anything strange. The footage from security cameras was grainy at best, if it even existed. As Sullivan dug deeper into Carol's life, he learned about her character, her habits, her relationships. Everyone said the same thing. Carol was not someone who would just vanish. Her coworkers, her friends, everyone echoed the same sentiment. And still no new answers. No breakthrough. No evidence. This case was starting to slip away into the cold, forgotten files of urban life. But the question lingered. Where was Carol? Was it just another missing person case, like so many others? Or was there something darker, something more sinister lurking behind her disappearance? Every moment passed with another unanswered question. The investigation was unraveling at the edges, and it was starting to feel like the case would slip through the cracks. But the thing about mysteries, about disappearances, they don't always stay buried. Sometimes, the truth finds a way to rise to the surface, even after years of silence. Do you think it's possible that a close-knit community could miss something as important as Carol's disappearance? What do you think drove her colleagues to not suspect foul play earlier? I read and reply to every comment, and I'd love to hear what you think. Let me know below. Also, where are you watching from today? I'm curious to know where everyone's tuning in from. The investigation was beginning to hit dead ends, until one fateful day when everything changed. It started with a grainy, forgotten piece of evidence: a VHS tape. The footage, recorded by a security camera at a nearby bodega, was shaky, blurry, and unclear. It was a snapshot of a time long past, a fleeting moment in the routine chaos of New York City. But that grainy footage held a clue that no one had noticed before. It showed Carol, her familiar burgundy purse visible in the footage, walking towards the subway station at precisely 6 a.m., just like every other day. But there was something more. Just behind her, a tall man. He kept his distance, never too close, but the way he moved, it wasn't right. The man's steps mirrored Carol's, matching her pace, but always remaining just far enough away to avoid detection. At first glance, it seemed like just another person on their way to work. But something about the way he followed her felt wrong. Detective Maria Santos, who had taken over the cold case, immediately saw the significance of the footage. She knew they had to enhance the images, somehow make sense of the blurry shadows in the frame. The forensic team worked their magic, and the footage became clearer. As the images sharpened, so did the chilling realization. This man wasn't just a stranger passing by. He was following Carol. And this wasn't just a random encounter. This was something calculated. Something sinister. The enhanced footage revealed the man's face, though barely discernible at first. His movements were deliberate, methodical, like a predator carefully stalking its prey. The name of the man in the footage would soon be revealed: Harold Brennan. Harold Brennan, Carol's building superintendent. The man who lived and worked just a few doors down from her. Up until this point, Brennan had been a quiet, almost invisible presence in the building. He had access to all the tenants' information. He knew the building schedule. He had keys to every door. He'd seen Carol every day. But what nobody had realized until now was that Brennan had been watching Carol, carefully, obsessively, for months. He knew her schedule better than anyone. He knew the exact time she left for work. He knew where she walked, how she took the subway, and when she would return. As detectives dug deeper into Brennan's background, they uncovered disturbing details. Tenants had complained about his strange behavior for years, about his constant presence in the hallways, his questions about tenant schedules, and his seemingly inappropriate interest in the women who lived in the building. Brennan had been dismissed as harmless by most people. Just a quirky, socially awkward building superintendent. But now, as the investigation progressed, it became clear that his behavior wasn't just odd, it was criminal. The breakthrough came when detectives uncovered Brennan's journals. These journals, carefully kept and meticulously written, revealed the extent of his obsession with Carol and other women. Brennan had been following Carol for months before her disappearance. His journals detailed every movement, every step she took, every day she walked to work. He had chronicled her routines with the precision of a predator. He had learned everything about her: the way she left for work, the route she took to the subway, the time she returned. He knew her patterns inside and out. The entries were chilling, revealing a man consumed by his obsession. Brennan had written about his plan for Carol, his fantasies, and his delusions of what he thought their relationship could be. He wrote about her like she was a prize to be won, detailing his frustrations and desires in a way that was both unsettling and disturbing. This wasn't just a case of stalking. This was an escalation. And it was leading somewhere much darker. The deeper they dug into Brennan's life, the more they found. Brennan had access to Carol's building. He had a key to every unit. He knew where she lived, when she was home, when she wasn't. He could come and go as he pleased without anyone questioning his presence. Carol had been living in a building with a man who had become obsessed with her. He had been watching her every move, studying her, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now that moment had come. The investigation revealed that Brennan had been waiting for the perfect opportunity. An opportunity to take control. He had been hiding in plain sight, using his position as superintendent to gain access to Carol's life. But how far was he willing to go to keep his secret? What had Brennan been planning all along? How had he managed to cover his tracks so thoroughly, so completely for so long? The investigation was closing in, and the evidence was mounting, but with each new discovery, the question became more urgent. What had Harold Brennan done to Carol Williams? And how far would he go to make sure no one ever found out? The search for answers was intensifying. And the truth, so dark, so twisted, was just beginning to surface. Jennifer Williams sat at her kitchen table, staring at the stack of missing persons flyers, her hands trembling slightly. The once neatly organized pile now looked chaotic, just like her life. She ran a hand through her hair, but her thoughts were clouded with a mixture of dread, hope, and exhaustion. The weight of Carol's disappearance had turned Jennifer's world upside down. It had been weeks now, weeks without answers, without knowing if her sister was alive or... She hadn't seen her sister for days, but Carol was a constant presence in her mind. Every phone call, every unanswered text, every memory of their time together was a raw wound she couldn't stop reopening. The pain was overwhelming, yet Jennifer kept moving. She had to. Carol's absence became Jennifer's life. She had called every hospital in the city. She'd walked the streets of Queens, handing out flyers, hoping someone, anyone, would know something. She spent her nights searching online forums and missing persons databases. It felt like she was fighting against an invisible force. The more she searched, the more hopeless it seemed. Time was slipping away, each passing day adding more uncertainty. But Jennifer couldn't stop. She wouldn't. Her career as a teacher had taken a backseat to the relentless pursuit of her sister. Jennifer had taken an unpaid leave from her job, unsure of when or if she would return. The search had become all-consuming. Her world reduced to the streets of Queens, the walls of police stations, and the endless lists of leads that went nowhere. She became a shadow in her own life, always chasing, always searching, but never quite finding what she needed, the truth, the closure. The phone call she dreaded came, as it always did, late in the evening. The voice on the other end was calm, but Jennifer knew there was no good news coming. The detective on the line explained that there had been no new developments in Carol's case. Nothing promising, at least. The leads were few and far between, and the case was growing cold. But Jennifer refused to accept the silence. She refused to let go of the idea that Carol was out there somewhere, waiting for someone to find her. So she kept calling. She kept handing out flyers. She kept asking questions. She kept her faith alive, even when it seemed impossible to do so. Her efforts were tireless, but the dead ends were relentless. Yet, as Jennifer struggled through the long days of uncertainty, something began to change in the investigation. An unexpected breakthrough was on the horizon. The forensic team working Carol's case had been slow, methodical, and careful. They had re-examined old evidence, trying to find anything that could lead to new insights. And they were about to find something that would shatter everything they thought they knew. DNA evidence that had once seemed irrelevant was now re-examined, using modern technology and techniques that hadn't been available in 1993. A sample of hair found at the scene where Carol had disappeared, was carefully analyzed again, and this time something remarkable happened. The breakthrough came when investigators noticed something that had been overlooked before, a matching DNA sample. It didn't belong to Carol. It belonged to Harold Brennan. The discovery was chilling. Harold Brennan, who had been living just down the hall from Carol, who had worked in her building, and who had become a seemingly harmless part of the scenery. No one had thought to connect him to the case. No one had suspected him. But now, everything was beginning to fall into place. The pieces of the puzzle that had seemed scattered were slowly being connected. Brennan had been living right under everyone's noses, just close enough to keep an eye on Carol without anyone noticing. His quiet demeanor had made him blend in, but the truth was beginning to surface now. He knew Carol. He watched her every day, learning her routines, following her without her ever knowing. The investigation was about to take a turn. As the forensic team re-examined old surveillance footage, they made another chilling discovery. Brennan was seen on camera, just a few steps behind Carol, walking in the same direction, following her on that fateful morning. He wasn't just a bystander. He was a stalker. But it wasn't just the footage that connected Brennan to Carol's disappearance. It was the journals. The journals were meticulously kept by Brennan over the years. They chronicled every detail of Carol's daily life, her habits, her routines. Brennan had been obsessively following her, tracking her movements and documenting them like a predator marking his territory. The discovery of these journals confirmed what everyone feared. Brennan had been watching Carol for months before her disappearance. He knew when she would leave for work. He knew when she would be home. He knew everything about her, and he had been using that knowledge for his own twisted purposes. The investigation had now shifted from a missing person case to something much darker. Brennan was no longer just a person of interest. He was the prime suspect. The pace of the investigation quickened as more evidence began to pile up. Brennan's movements, his obsession with Carol, his patterns of behavior. All of it started to make sense in the worst way possible. With the help of modern forensic techniques, investigators were finally starting to understand just how deep Brennan's obsession ran. The journals, the surveillance footage, the DNA, all of it pointed to one horrifying conclusion. Harold Brennan had been stalking Carol Williams for months before her disappearance. The community was in shock. How could someone like Brennan, someone they all knew, be capable of such a thing? The very thought was unsettling. How could a man who seemed so ordinary be hiding such a twisted side? But the answers were clear now. Brennan had been living in the shadows, watching Carol, waiting for the right moment to strike. And on October 15, 1993, he had taken that moment. The investigation was far from over, but the pieces were beginning to come together. And with every new revelation, the stakes grew higher. What had Brennan done to Carol? And how far was he willing to go to keep his secrets buried? But one thing was certain. This was no longer just a case of a missing woman. This was something much darker. Something that was only just beginning to unfold. The truth was finally coming to light. But the real question was, what had Brennan done, and how would the investigation change everything? At what point do you think Jennifer Williams realized that finding her sister would consume her life? How much do you think grief can fuel a relentless search for the truth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, because I read and reply to every comment. And where are you watching from today? Drop your location and let's connect. Detective Mike Sullivan sat at his desk, sifting through the stack of case files in front of him. His eyes scanned the thick file on Carol Williams, one that had been opened and closed more times than he could count. But now, something was different. There was a shift in the air. A shift he hadn't felt in years. The past few days had brought new hope, but it came with a realization that they were only scratching the surface. Harold Brennan was no longer just a name on a list. He was the man they needed to investigate further. But there was something unsettling about it all. The more they uncovered, the deeper the mystery seemed to get. It was as though every piece of the puzzle led to more questions. More unknowns, like the complex web of a man who had lived his life hidden in plain sight. A man who had been in the background, watching, waiting, and yet, no one had suspected a thing. The first breakthrough came during Brennan's interview. It was a routine procedure, something that had been done 100 times before. But something about Brennan's responses, his demeanor, and his knowledge of Carol was off. He knew too much, Sullivan said, his voice low, almost to himself as he replayed Brennan's words in his mind. Too much for someone who had just been an acquaintance, a background figure in Carol's life. But the first moments of this investigation had been spent like most cold cases. A lot of waiting, hoping that something, anything, would surface. And now it was finally happening. The clues that had been ignored for years were being pulled to the surface. Sullivan hadn't yet fully realized it, but he was on the cusp of something bigger. Something that would shake everyone to their core. Brennan's behavior in the interview was unsettling. He answered questions with a calm that almost seemed rehearsed, like a man who had been preparing for this day for a long time. His indifference to Carol's disappearance, his almost clinical responses, raised red flags. The more Sullivan listened, the more he was convinced. Brennan knew exactly what had happened. The breakthrough came in the form of Brennan's personal belongings. Hidden in a storage unit, tucked away behind a wall, were photographs, notebooks, and items from Carol's apartment. The images were chilling. Carol in the everyday moments of her life, captured without her knowledge. And then there were the journals, detailing every little thing she did. Her routines, her habits, where she walked, what she wore. Brennan had been following her for months. Each new piece of evidence felt like a dagger, each one revealing just how deep his obsession ran. They weren't just finding clues. They were finding a person whose life had been consumed with something so dark, so twisted, that it had been hidden for decades. But now, as they dug deeper, the investigation revealed something even more disturbing. Brennan's knowledge of Carol's life was more than just surface level. He had infiltrated her world in ways no one had realized. And in hindsight, the signs had been there all along. Subtle hints that something wasn't right. Witnesses began to recall details they'd forgotten, or dismissed as nothing more than coincidence at the time. A neighbor had seen Brennan near the building more often than he should have been. A tenant had felt uncomfortable with how Brennan would linger in the hallways, always asking too many questions, always bumping into people at odd hours. But even with all of this new information, there was still so much more to uncover. Detective Sullivan, now accompanied by a new team, focused on revisiting every angle, every detail that had been overlooked in the initial rush to label this a routine disappearance. New forensic evidence began to pour in. Hair samples, fingerprints, and even forensic analysis of Brennan's past encounters with women. They weren't just investigating a missing woman anymore. They were uncovering a pattern of behavior that went back years. Years of harassment. Years of stalking. Years of hiding in plain sight. It was these small pieces, these seemingly insignificant details, that began to paint a much clearer picture. And with each passing day, the investigation was gaining momentum. But the chilling reality of what they were dealing with was becoming harder to ignore. Jennifer Williams, Carol's sister, had been tirelessly working alongside investigators. At first, her search had been about finding answers. But as she saw the case unfold, she began to see it differently. Every new lead, every interview, every breakthrough, Jennifer could feel the gravity of the case weighing on her. It wasn't just about finding Carol anymore. It was about understanding who Harold Brennan was and why he had done this. Jennifer had become more than just a sister seeking answers. She had become an advocate for the truth. Her efforts were no longer just about finding Carol. They were about ensuring that people understood just how deeply the systems around them had failed. And more than anything, they were about ensuring no one else would ever have to go through what she had endured. But for every piece of new evidence that surfaced, there were more questions, more details that didn't quite add up. And despite the breakthroughs in technology, the old wounds kept reopening. There were moments of hope, of course. Like the moment the grainy VHS footage from a bodega's security camera had been enhanced, revealing a shadowy figure behind Carol. Someone who had followed her, almost obsessively, without her knowledge. This person had been watching Carol long before she disappeared. It was these moments, these flashes of clarity, that kept Jennifer going. And then there was the moment when they discovered the journals, each one meticulously detailed, filled with accounts of Carol's movements, her habits, and the things Brennan had learned about her. These journals were a chilling testament to just how long this had been going on. and how deeply Brennan had delved into Carol's life without anyone ever noticing. The case was moving forward, but it wasn't without its obstacles. Each new discovery felt like a step closer to the truth, but each new discovery also brought with it more questions. Questions that hadn't yet been answered. There was a sense that the clock was ticking. Each day felt like another chance for the truth to slip away again. But, for the first time in years, there was also a sense of hope. This case wasn't going to stay cold. Not anymore. The evidence was mounting. The suspect was becoming clearer. And the stakes were higher than ever before. But there was still one question that haunted Detective Sullivan and Jennifer Williams as they continued their search for the truth. What had Harold Brennan been planning all along? Had he always intended to hurt Carol, or had his obsession simply spiraled out of control? What drove him to stalk and then abduct her? And how many others had he watched before her? The investigation was only getting started. But every answer seemed to bring with it a new, more chilling question. The air in the precinct was thick with anticipation as Detective Maria Santos sat at her cluttered desk, papers scattered in disarray, half-empty coffee cups cluttering the corners. She had been pushing through cases for hours, her mind focused on each detail. Then the unexpected happened. The case file of Carol Williams, long dormant in the cold case archives, caught her eye. It wasn't just a normal cold case file. It was a mess of loose documents, faded photographs, and old evidence bags, tucked away in a dusty corner of the precinct's basement. A file that had been forgotten for decades. Maria had been working on digitizing old cold cases, scanning the files and re-uploading them into a system that would make them easier to search. But as she flipped through the old records, something stood out. A name, a note from an officer who had worked the case in 1993, written in the margin of the file. The note referenced a VHS tape from a bodega's security footage that had been obtained shortly after Carol's disappearance but never fully processed. The tape had been forgotten, buried beneath piles of paperwork. It was assumed that nothing of value could be found on the footage. But now, with new forensic tools and technology available in 2018, Maria saw the potential. This was the breakthrough the case needed. The technology was finally able to bring clarity to something that had been left in the shadows for decades. Maria immediately requested the VHS tape from the archives, heart pounding as the retrieval team brought it to her desk. She hadn't expected much, but her instincts told her there was more to this case than anyone had realized. The tape was grainy. Of course it was. Most old footage from the 90s was. But there was something about the footage that caught Maria's attention. She watched as Carol, dressed in her scrubs, walked toward the subway station at exactly 6 a.m., just as Sarah Chen had described. But as Maria adjusted the brightness and contrast on the screen, something became clear, something she hadn't noticed before. In the background, barely visible at first, was a tall man, his movements deliberate, always staying a few feet behind Carol, matching her pace but never getting too close. He wasn't just a passerby. He was following her, stalking her. Maria froze, watching the man's figure in the grainy footage. She had seen his silhouette 1,000 times before in various cases, always in the background, never suspected, never fully realized for what it truly was. This time she could see him clearly. His face was still a blur, but his actions were undeniable. He was watching Carol. And he had been for weeks. The footage, however, wasn't the only thing that changed the course of the investigation. As Maria dug deeper into the records from 1993, she discovered something shocking. Something that had been overlooked at the time. A key witness statement from a neighbor had been misfiled, buried in the wrong section of the case archives. It wasn't just any witness statement. It was from a tenant who had seen someone hanging around Carol's apartment building in the days leading up to her disappearance. The neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, had described a man who was always asking about Carol's schedule. He had seemed too interested in Carol's daily routines, more so than any normal building superintendent should be. Mrs. Rodriguez had mentioned him casually to police in 1993, but the statement had been dismissed as an irrelevant detail, a passing observation. After all, Who would suspect the man who had access to every part of the building? Who would think that someone in charge of maintenance might be involved in something so sinister? Maria's heart raced as she read the statement again. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. That man, that figure in the background of the security footage, was Harold Brennan, the building superintendent. He had been the one to know Carol's schedule, to have access to the building, and to be lurking in the shadows for months before her disappearance. The realization hit Maria hard. Brennan had been right under everyone's nose this whole time, and no one had connected the dots. He had managed to hide his true nature behind a mask of normalcy, using his position to observe and learn the routines of the women who lived in the building. And now, after all these years, the truth was starting to come to light. Maria quickly called Detective Mike Sullivan, who had been handling the case in its early days. "Sullivan, we've got something," she said, her voice tense with excitement. "It's Brennan. I'm sure of it. He's the one who followed Carol that morning. I need you to pull his old records, his background. We need to take a deeper look at his behavior before her disappearance." Sullivan listened, his mind racing as Maria filled him in on the new developments. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. But even as they moved closer to the truth, there was still something deeply unsettling about the way Brennan had managed to fly under the radar for so long. How had he avoided suspicion? How had no one noticed? Maria and Sullivan knew they needed to act fast. Brennan had been in the building for years, and now they were uncovering a disturbing pattern of behavior. He had been watching Carol and others for months, learning their schedules, their routines, and their vulnerabilities. His obsession with Carol wasn't a random act. It was methodical. It was calculated. And now, they were about to uncover just how far his twisted obsession went. The deeper they went, the more disturbing the truth became. Maria's investigation into Brennan's history revealed more than just a few odd complaints from tenants. It revealed a pattern of escalation, a man whose behavior had only grown more dangerous over time. He had been involved in multiple incidents over the years, but each time the complaints were brushed off, dismissed as nothing more than minor issues. No one ever connected the dots between the complaints and the missing women. But now, armed with the new evidence and the enhanced footage, they had the ammunition they needed. Harold Brennan's days of hiding in plain sight were over. But the more they uncovered, the more questions arose. How long had Brennan been stalking Carol? How many other women had he targeted over the years? Was he the only one, or was there a darker web of connections waiting to be revealed? As the investigation gained traction, Maria's team was beginning to connect the dots. Dots that had been invisible for decades. And as they pieced the puzzle together, one thing was becoming painfully clear. This was far from the end of the story. There were more revelations to come, more secrets to unearth. And Brennan's arrest was just the beginning. Maria stood in the dimly lit precinct, staring at the stack of files in front of her. Each one contained a different story, a different life disrupted by Harold Brennan's hidden obsession. As the clock ticked down to the final moments before his arrest, Maria knew one thing for certain. Brennan's capture wasn't the final chapter, it was only the start. But what happened next would leave them all questioning how much they truly knew about the people around them. How many others had been living in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike? And how long had Harold Brennan been hiding in plain sight? With every new discovery, the case began to feel less like a single tragedy and more like the tip of an iceberg. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that the truth was far darker than anyone could have imagined. What's your take on the moment they uncovered the misfiled evidence? How often do you think cases are dismissed because of overlooked details? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I read and reply to every comment. The search for Carol Williams had uncovered more than just the grim details of a woman's disappearance. It had revealed the layers of human emotion, the complexities of grief, and the darkness lurking behind a seemingly ordinary life. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Carol's story would have a lasting impact, not only on the community but on the lives of those closest to her. And as the truth began to emerge, So too did the haunting psychological profiles of those involved. Carol Williams had always been a reliable presence in the lives of everyone who knew her. To her colleagues, she was a model nurse, meticulous, kind, and always willing to help. To her roommates, she was a steady companion, someone with whom you could share simple moments and quiet comfort. But when she vanished, everything changed. For Jennifer Williams, Carol's disappearance was more than just the loss of a sibling. It was the loss of a part of herself. Jennifer had always been close to Carol. They were not just sisters but confidants, partners in life's challenges. They spoke on the phone every Sunday, exchanged birthday cards that arrived exactly 3 days early, and shared a bond that could never be replaced. But on that cold October morning, Jennifer's world was thrown into chaos. Her grief was immediate. The kind of grief that twists your insides, that wraps itself around your chest and doesn't let go. Jennifer couldn't understand it at first. How could Carol, of all people, simply disappear? A woman so punctual, so reliable. Someone whose absence would leave a gaping hole in the lives of everyone who knew her. Jennifer began her search with determination, with hope. But the more she searched, the more she realized that answers were not going to come easily. Jennifer's life, once full of the routine of teaching, quickly became consumed by Carol's disappearance. She took unpaid leave from her job and moved into Carol's apartment, turning the living room into a command center for the search. Flyers were printed. Maps of Queens were marked with pins to show where Carol had been last seen. Jennifer, once a calm and collected teacher, had transformed into an advocate. Someone who was fighting for justice in the face of a system that seemed to have forgotten her sister. But even as she canvassed the streets, handing out flyers and knocking on doors, Jennifer knew something was slipping away. The clock was ticking, and as the months turned to years, the hope that Carol would be found faded into a quiet, persistent sorrow. There was no longer the desperate panic of the first few days, but a quiet, grinding frustration, an understanding that the world had moved on, while Jennifer was stuck, waiting for something that might never come. What Jennifer didn't realize was that her grief, while consuming, was becoming a defining part of her identity. It became who she was, the sister of the missing nurse, the woman who wouldn't stop searching. And it wasn't just about finding Carol anymore. It was about bringing justice, about showing the world that Carol had mattered, that she wasn't just another missing person to be forgotten. Jennifer had become a symbol of persistence, a voice for the voiceless, even as it slowly ate away at her peace. While Jennifer was trapped in the emotional web of loss, another story was unfolding, one that was far darker and more disturbing. The story of Harold Brennan, the man who had been hiding in plain sight for so many years. The man who, for over a decade, had turned his obsession into an art form. Hiding behind his job, his community, and his normal life, Brennan's mind was a labyrinth of twisted thoughts. He didn't see Carol as a woman or a person with a family. He saw her as a puzzle to be solved, a routine to be mastered. From the moment he had started watching her, he had become fixated on the precision of her daily life. He knew when she left for work, when she returned, when she bought her coffee, when she spoke to the neighbors. He knew her life better than she did. And this wasn't just about control, it was about power. Brennan didn't just want to observe Carol. He wanted to own her, in the most terrifying way possible. He had been stalking her for months, if not longer. His obsession wasn't random. It was methodical, calculated. Brennan had spent years learning every minute detail of Carol's life. He knew her schedule better than her closest friends. He had access to her apartment building, her workplace, her routines, and he used it to his advantage. But Brennan didn't stop at just observing. He crossed the line. He entered her personal space. He followed her. He took photographs. He documented every step she made, recording each moment in the creepy journals that would later be uncovered. The more investigators delved into Brennan's psyche, the more disturbing it became. His behavior wasn't just obsessive. It was predatory. He had been stalking women for years, using his position as a building superintendent to blend into the background, to watch from the shadows, to strike when no one was paying attention. He had been living a double life for decades, a man with a respectable job, an ordinary apartment, and a perfectly normal existence on the outside. But underneath it all was a monster who could not be stopped. But even as Brennan's psychological profile emerged, disturbing, chilling, and full of red flags, there was someone else who was also struggling with their own grief and loss. Ben Williams, Carol's brother, had been living in the shadow of his sister's disappearance, trying to hold it together for his family. But the weight of not knowing, the agony of never getting an answer, was slowly consuming him too. Ben had always been the more quiet, introspective one. While Jennifer fought for justice with a determination that had become her identity, Ben had struggled to cope with the trauma in his own way. He kept his emotions close to his chest, never fully able to express his grief. But it was there, buried beneath the surface, eating at him from the inside out. Over the years, Ben had transitioned from a passive family member, someone who simply stood by as his sister's case unfolded, to an active participant in the search for Carol. His grief, much like Jennifer's, had transformed. It wasn't just about the loss of a sister anymore. It was about justice. It was about finding the person responsible for Carol's disappearance and bringing them to account. As the investigation picked up steam, Ben found himself thrust into the spotlight. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was part of the narrative, the man who would stop at nothing to find his sister. His journey was painful, but it mirrored his sister's. Both were stuck in the limbo of uncertainty, never fully able to let go of the hope that someday they would have answers. But there was a critical difference between Jennifer and Ben. Jennifer had become a public advocate for Carol, an emotional warrior who fought for justice. Ben, on the other hand, had taken a quieter, more personal approach to his grief. His transformation from someone who simply waited for answers to someone who actively sought them was a slow and painful journey. But in the end, it was Ben who would carry the weight of their family's pain, just as much as Jennifer, just as much as Carol. As Carol's case began to unfold, the psychological impacts of her disappearance stretched far beyond just the immediate family. Brennan's obsession had left an indelible mark on everyone around him. His ability to hide his true self for so long, his ability to slip through the cracks unnoticed, was terrifying in its own right. Now, as the investigation continued, it was clear Carol's case was far from over, and the psychological toll it had taken on her family, on those who had known her best, was just beginning to unravel. But what would happen next? Would the answers they had all been waiting for finally be revealed? And what did it mean for everyone who had been living in the shadows of Carol's disappearance for so long? The search for Carol Williams wasn't just about finding a missing person. It became a journey through layers of community, family, and ultimately, the long path to justice. After years of unanswered questions, the breakthrough finally came. But as with every story of loss and discovery, it raised new questions. Questions about what could have been done differently. What was missed? As you sit here watching this story unfold, I ask you, what do you think could have been done differently in Carol's case? Could more attention have been paid to Brennan's behavior earlier? The warning signs were there, weren't they? Brennan had been hiding in plain sight for years, working as a superintendent, walking past Carol every day, knowing her schedule better than she did. If someone had just paid closer attention, if someone had just questioned his odd behavior earlier, could Carol have been found sooner? And what about technology? We've seen the way new forensic advancements, new methods of surveillance, completely turned this case on its head. What if these tools had been available back in 1993? Could the case have been solved in those first few days? I want to know your thoughts. Do you think more could have been done to prevent Carol's tragic disappearance? Do you believe technology and modern investigative techniques played a crucial role in bringing justice to light, or would it have happened anyway, in time? Carol's case wasn't just another name in the file. It wasn't just another cold case. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkness, there is hope, and sometimes the truth takes time to uncover. Please, share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think should have been done differently? Was there something the community or the authorities missed that could have saved Carol? And if you found this story as gripping as I did, If you believe that justice is worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more shocking true crime stories. Hit the notification bell, so you'll be the first to know when the next story unfolds. I read and reply to every comment. Your thoughts matter to me, and I want to hear your opinions on this case. Join the conversation and let's dig deeper into these mysteries, together. I can't thank you enough for being here with me today as we uncover the truth behind this heartbreaking case. Your support fuels my drive to continue sharing stories that matter, and I'm beyond grateful for every one of you who takes the time to watch and engage. If this story moved you, please do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. These cases take a lot of effort to bring to life, and your support is what keeps it all going. Share this video with someone who still believes in justice, or someone who needs to hear about the power of persistence and modern forensics. And remember to turn on that notification bell, because I've got more shocking true crime cases lined up for you. And if you want more content like this, don't miss out on the next video. It's just one click away. Let's continue uncovering the truth, because some stories deserve to be heard, no matter how long it takes.